Grasses. There are two basic types, cool growers and warm growers. Well, what's the difference between these? Well, you should have been able to guess that by now. Cool growers grow when it's cool. So our lawn, for instance, is a cool grower, and the lawn is starting to grow right now, has been for a couple of weeks. It's going to do really well over the next month or two. And then by July and August, it just gets too hot, so they stop growing. And then these cool growers will start up again in September, October when things cool down. Now, the warm growers are the exact opposite. Right now, the warm growers aren't doing anything. They're just sitting there doing absolutely nothing in the garden. And they're not going to get active until the temperatures get quite a bit warmer. They'll grow all summer long and into the fall, but they really like that warm temperature for growth. Culture for these things is pretty simple. The slide shows my garden sort of midsummer, I would say. So on the left here, we have this festuca, which is this blue grass, and it's a cool grower, and it's evergreen in zone 5. So it pretty much looks like that all year long. In the spring, some of last year's blades have died off and they're brown, and you just kind of comb them out if you like. And by combing, I just use my hands, and you just kind of gently feel through it, and the dead stuff comes out. Or quite honestly, you can just leave it and the wind will blow it out when they're ready. The one on the right there is a really nice Miscanthus variegatus. It's quite tall, so at this point it's about half grown, so it'll get at least twice this height. But early in the year, like right now, all that is brown stubble from last year. There's nothing there, and it won't start to grow until it warms up. And that's important when we talk about designing with these grasses. So here's some other cultural things. So watering, how do you water these guys? That's real simple. You don't. One of the nice things about growing grasses is you pretty much ignore them. They like dry conditions. They don't need to be watered. For the most part, there are a few exceptions, and particularly the ones that are in sunny areas, just leave them alone. For planting, they like crappy soil, so don't augment that soil. Don't have to do anything special to the soil. We don't fertilize these things. They don't need a lot of nutrients. There are some that like sun, and most of them actually like sun. And there are a few that we will talk about later that like a shady condition. So they're very low maintenance. The only thing you do have to do with some of them is cutting them back. So if we look at the two on the screen here, the one on the left I never cut back because it's evergreen. The one on the right is not evergreen, so during the winter it grows brown. And then in spring, we cut them down to the ground. And by cutting to the ground, I usually leave a stubble that's somewhere in the 3-inch, 4-inch range. One year, the grasses were still looking pretty good in spring. They were all upright, and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to leave them. I mean, they're brown, but they still looked good in the garden. So I just left them, and I cut them back very late. That really wasn't the best idea because I found one of these big clumps that a bird had nested in there, and she already had a couple eggs in the nest by the time I came along and cut the whole thing off. So now I cut them a little earlier. Doesn't really matter when, but as soon as it's nice enough in the garden, go out and cut your grasses. Now you can cut them back a couple different ways, but I usually just use pruners. On a really big clump and where the grass stems are really thick, I actually use a chainsaw, which I wouldn't really recommend for most people unless you're really comfortable with it. Hedge trimmers would work well, and if you don't have that, just cut them with some secateurs. One thing that grasses do, and it's kind of annoying, is they get this hollow center. The new blades are always growing around the outside of this grass. After a period of time, the center gets quite old and dead. And so here's a picture of a grass that's probably been in this spot somewhere like 6-7 years at this point. And the center is hollow. Now, the grass is happy like this. This is how it grows. The grass doesn't need you to do anything, but aesthetically, it doesn't look quite so nice. So once they reach this stage, a lot of people will dig them up, get rid of that center, replant them, and have a nice looking grass. This is really the only hard part about grasses. If it's a small one like this, you can dig it up and use a knife, a saw if you like, anything to cut these. Small ones aren't too bad. Big ones can be a real pain. And this is the one thing I hate about ornamental grasses is dividing them. Now, luckily, you only have to do it every 8 years or 10 years. I mean, I have some in the ground that are 15 years old and they're still there, and I really don't want to divide them. They're hard to dig up, And this is actually not a bad way to separate them. You just take them out, chop them into little pieces. Every little piece will grow. You simply can't hurt this plant. There's also some grasses that you should never plant. And unfortunately, some of them are really nice looking. So this is one called ribbon grass. It's a beautiful little grass, 2 feet tall. It's got this nice silvery white stripe, spreads like crazy. Now, this isn't too bad if you have it in a place where it's surrounded with concrete on all sides. Maybe the median front of your house right beside the road, I've seen it there. It can't really escape from there. So it's not self-seeding, but it does spread like crazy and the runners are hard to control. This is a grass you really should never buy and nurseries should never sell, but they continue to sell them. The other one that I like to mention, and that is one of the most common types of grasses, is a miscanthus. And there's over 100 different kinds of miscanthus. In zone 5, they're really not much of a problem. But in zone 6 and warmer, they're starting to self-seed. And down in the US in zone 7 and 8, they're becoming a real problem and they're becoming very invasive. In zone 6, they will self-seed a bit. In zone 5, we're just too cold for the seed heads to actually mature the seeds, so they aren't a problem here. But it's probably better not to grow miscanthus or look for one that's sterile. So not all miscanthus will make seed even in a warm climate. Most of the grasses are pretty good, but I had this experience. So I had this one on the top left, the Pennisetum called Madre. Beautiful little plant, 2 feet tall, makes these fuzzy little heads in the fall. Really nice looking plant. Loved it for 2 or 3 years. And then I noticed it's everywhere. And the little seedlings are really hard to dig out. They have this root system that's just a monster. I took the plant out and I had seedlings for another 5 years. And I'm still not sure I got rid of it all. The one on the bottom right looks almost identical. The heads aren't quite as nice. It's called Hamelin, but it doesn't self-seed. So when you're looking for these grasses, do a little research, look them up, try and find out whether they're spreaders or not. And this one is spreading by seeds. It doesn't really spread much by runners. It's a seeding problem. But I would never grow Madre again in a garden. Now you might have a dog in the garden, one that looks kind of like this, so you might want to grow some bamboo. And bamboo is a great plant. Now we can't grow bamboo like this, but we can grow bamboo that grows to about a 1/2 inch in diameter, maybe 1 inch in diameter, but we can't grow the really big stuff, unfortunately. The problem with bamboo is that we have 2 types of bamboo. We have what's called runners and we have clumpers. A runner is a bamboo that makes runners across the ground and spreads like crazy. Never plant a runner. They're really hard to control. The university has some right by the Arboretum Center, but it's surrounded on concrete on one side and metal edging on the other side, and it takes over that space. And about every 3 years or so, they come along and dig some of it out because it's just such a vigorous grower. Don't buy a spreader. The clumpers are really nice, and as the name implies, those clumpers will stay as a nice clump and very slowly spread sideways. There's nothing wrong with buying those. Now here's some ideas for design. So here's a picture that I took a couple days ago. This corner is a large miscanthus. So at the end of the summer, it's about 7 feet tall. The problem with these grasses is that this time of the year, they're kind of ugly. Yeah, I cut it back a couple weeks ago. It's brown stubble. It's going to look like this for at least another month before it starts growing. Because remember, these are warm growers. And these warm growers don't look like much in the spring. I would suggest you plant them in the middle of a bed. Then you won't notice this and you don't really care. In this case, I grow right in this corner of this bed because I like to have tall plants right near the front. That's one of those golden design rules that says never put anything tall in the front of your bed. So of course I put it there. And I actually like it because people go by and everyone touches this plant. It's very textural. And so I think it actually works quite well there. But I put up with his ugliness in the spring. Here's another picture from my garden from quite a few years ago. And my garden, by the way, is called Aspen Grove. hence the name on the sign. You've got a couple evergreens here. On the right side, you have this rock. You kind of have this space on the right that looks a little naked right now. And so this is springtime, right? You can see a little daffodil blooming there. Well, behind that rock is a nice miscanthus. I put it there on purpose so that you don't see the ugliness too much. You're looking at the sign and the evergreens and the rock kind of hides those ugly stubbles in the spring. But by midsummer, it starts coming up. By fall, this is a spectacular showstop. It's a really nice plant. This is what it looked like a couple days ago. Not looking so great. The evergreen is a different evergreen actually, but it's gotten quite big, so this spot is shaded too much. And you can see it's got this hollow center. So it's been in this spot 12, 13 years. So that's pretty good. But now it's time to tear this guy apart. It's starting to die out in the center. It doesn't look nearly so nice. It's not making nice large clumps. And so what I'm going to do here, and I hope to turn it into a video, is to actually dig all this up, get rid of all the stubble in there, replant some good pieces in the center, and start it all up again, and I'll be good for another 10 years. Here's another view of my garden, and on the left side is that large miscanthus that I showed you that's right near the edge of the pathway. They can be very architectural, and late in the year, they're really nice plants. On this one now, with a little bit of global warming taking place, it does form flowers sometime in October, but they really don't form seeds because the flowers don't completely open and they don't have time to be pollinated and produce seeds. So it's not spreading anywhere. This is a really nice miscanthus called strictus. The nice thing about grasses is they do come in a variety of different colors with bars and stripes and so on. Lots to choose from. Here's another view of my garden. I have this little Japanese bridge going across this artificial river. We've got the blue festuca right in the front here. It stays evergreen. We've got this large miscanthus, which is a showstopper late in the season. Over here, I think this is actually the Maudry that we were talking about, which is no longer there. That's the one I threw out. Way over in the left here is another very tall grass. Well, I like to place them in different parts of the garden. If you put them all together, then in spring you have a garden that's kind of ugly, right? So in spring I have other things, and then a grass, which will be the star in the fall. And then I have a bunch of other plants, which are stars in the spring and summer, and another grass, which will be the star in the fall. Here's my waterfall, and you can see some vertical grasses growing in here. I think they had a nice touch to the side of a pond or a waterfall. And you can use them for practical purposes. This is actually a grass that I have no idea what the name is. I collected some seed before I moved into this property, say 16 years ago. The seed germinated. I grew the grass. Then I found out, well, you shouldn't do that because if you can grow it from seed, then it's going to seed around and be a real pest in the garden. But this clump has never seeded anywhere. The reason it's here is it hides my water tap. So for a good part of the year, it looks much nicer than looking at the water. Here's another one up on the hill, nice striped miscanthus and some Russian sage in the front. The two of them seem to go really nice together. Works almost anywhere. I like this one too, Carl Forster. This one I've had for a long time, and it just doesn't seem to get any bigger, unfortunately. It's just the same size year after year. To the left of the grass is something else that looks like grass, but that's actually a yucca, which is a similar type of plant, but it's not really an ornamental grass. Here's some other no-name grasses that a friend of mine gave me. They look great most of the year. Now let's look at some grasses for the shady part of your garden. And this has got to be one of the best. It's Hakonechloa. They come in different colors, so this one's kind of striped. I also have one that's pure yellow. There's some that have kind of a red stripe in them. It's shade to part shade. It has this nice flowing look to it, but this grass needs moisture. If it's too dry, this clump will get smaller and smaller every year. If you keep it good and wet, I mean, it doesn't need a pond or anything, but it does like regular water. Then it grows and can become quite a spectacular plant. You see this a lot in magazines when they do reviews of gardens because this plant always looks good once it's a larger clump. It does grow fairly slowly. It doesn't really spread a lot. It doesn't seed around, so it's a great plant. but you have to have some shade and you have to have it moist. Now, I don't mean I water this a lot, but it does get a little extra water when I've got the hose out. There's a family of grasses called the carex, and almost all the carex love part shade, and some of them can even take fairly heavy shade. And they're generally smaller grasses, so we're talking a foot to maybe 2 feet. Some are even shorter than that. They come in a number of different stripes and bars and blues and greens and so on. They're all part shaped. So as soon as you see a carex, part shade. And the other thing that's great about grasses is that they're great even in the winter time. So there are a couple evergreens in this picture, but most of the things that you see that are still vertical are all grasses. And I think this is really one of the times they look their best. Now, if we have some heavy storms, those storms will knock down the grasses. But if we get light snow, they stay upright. Some winters, by the end of the winter, they're mostly laying on the ground, but some winters they stay upright the whole time and they're still standing upright at the end of the summer.